So what I wanted to do in this video is I wanted to talk about how to fix early hip extension. And there's a couple of things that you're going to need to know, and then hopefully this tip that I'm going to share with you will make a big difference and potentially be the missing link to helping you fix early hip extension. Now, to clarify, it's a common problem that a high level of amateur golfers have, and for clarification, there's one thing that we need to understand, and it's retaining hip depth. So if I drew a line on the back of my hips here, what should happen is in the backswing position, I should rotate back so my right hip moves back behind the line. As I start the downswing, I should pull my lead hip back, right, so it matches up towards on that line. And then as I sort of swing through, obviously my right hip's going to move forward, my left hip swings back, and then eventually once we get to this post-impact position, I'm going to start to stand up, okay? So that's known as retaining hip depth. What happens with golfers who struggle with early hip extension is they sort of swing back and then they immediately come off this line, which causes all sorts of potential problems. Now, the first thing that I want to clarify, because it is a big issue, is when we're talking about this sort of early hip extension, you've got to understand it's about the start to the downswing. So what happens is that we would swing up, we would sort of be rotating, as I demonstrated there, retaining hip depth. But then once we get into this sort of early downswing, once we finish this swing, we want to make sure we finish the swing. So see the way my upper body is placed over my lead leg. I tend to see golfers try and battle early hip extension by sort of staying down like so. You will never get a good flowing, swing unless you're allowing the upper part of the body to finish over the leg. So don't compromise that part of the swing, okay? So how are you going to fix it? Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to make you aware of sort of how we're starting the downswing and one of the tips that could, like I say, really help you. And a lot of it comes around understanding how to interact with the floor, particularly with the trail leg. So one of my favourite training aids is a wedge pro, okay, or a sort of wedge like so. Callaway Golf do a wedge. There's other options. A lot of my students tend to buy them, yoga platform wedges, but the reason why I love the wedge is it does two things. It elevates the foot up in the air, so it helps the leg stay more flexed, and it also pronates the foot. So that kind of means it's almost like a feeling like a sprinter in the block analogy, or it feels like I'm trying to squash what is underneath my right side. Imagine there was something under my right foot. I want to squash it. I'm going to kind of move like that. I'm not going to kind of do something like this. So what I tend to find with students is that as soon as I introduce that platform, they start to move and respond in relationship to the ground much better. They keep the trail leg more flexed, and to me that generally looks like they're pushing much better pressure in towards that backswing position. Now, so that's one thing, right? The idea is that we're trying to build up a better interaction with the ground in the backswing. We're trying to make sure we shift pressure in towards that trail leg. But what I also want you to be slightly aware of, particularly when you're making practice swings, is what your foot is doing, but from a horizontal perspective. So if you imagine that my trail foot was now balanced on ice, okay, so as I demonstrate my rotation in the backswing, what would happen is that my foot would also spin out in a clockwise manner, okay, because there's not enough friction underneath it to keep it still. But because I've got my shoes on and because we've got the ground beneath me, what's able to happen is that although I'm rotating, my foot feels like it's going to be moving in a clockwise fashion. But because of my trail leg staying flexed and because the friction underneath my foot, I'm able to fight against that movement. But if you sort of watch my trail foot, for example, you can see the way that it's moving, right? It's not like it just sort of stays there and I'm going on my heel. So the way it moves and my foot's kind of being pushed to the outer part of my shoe as it creates an element of resistance against this movement. Now the reason why that's key is because as I sort of load and move in towards this backswing position, so I keep that trail leg flexed, I can now sort of feel as I start the downswing, I'm going to use that pressure, okay, to sort of get the feeling of triggering my rotation. So as I'm going to now rotate and feel like my pelvis and chest is going to rotate towards the target as I shift my weight progressively to the left, I'm almost getting a feeling that my foot is further moving in a clockwise manner as I sort of rotate this way, and this helps me produce that squat. Now, if you're doing that at home, you can just play around with that feeling. So it's almost like swing back, feel the foot this way in a clockwise manner, and then as you almost go to rotate in towards the target, you can almost get a feeling that your foot would further move in a clockwise feeling. Now, the reason why I think that's so good is because what tends to happen with students that I meet is that they understand the concept of early hip extension. Okay, so then they do things like they just try and stay downward like this. And that's not what we're looking for. Like I said to you at the beginning of the video, we're looking for progressive rotation through the ball. What we have to do is we have to use this trail leg to its full capacity to start that downswing. So what I mean is if you sort of, the golfers that struggle will swing back And then what they'll do is, instead of using this leg as a platform to push them off in the opposite direction, what they'll often do is they'll sort of move this way. So see the way that my toe kind of kicks in and then my heel would kick out, and we don't want that sort of movement, not to start off with. What we want to do is we want to load in towards that right side, use that right side as we progressively move to the left, as I'm demonstrating here. And then once I get into my left, then I can extend and finish that swing. So my simple tip is experiment with building a good interaction with the backswing, keeping that trail leg flex, get a nice rotation, and then simultaneously just sort of be aware of what your foot is trying to do in relationship to the ground. And then as you simultaneously go to rotate your weight back to the lead side, I want you to get the feeling of what your foot is doing. And you might just find that when you next hit balls down the range, getting a bit more weight pressure underneath that trail side and then using that right side to push you off into the downswing could just make a massive difference. Like I say, it's definitely worth experimenting with at home because it's helped for a lot of students that I'm working with. See you soon.